Playing with teammates under your level is not only something that everyone doesn't want to do, but it is also bothersome because you have to play suboptimally sometimes in order to accomplish a victory throughout the game. Now, you have to play with a reminder that your teammates may not be able to mechanically do what is most optimal in the moment. And this may sound bitter, and many people play this off with the idea that you should focus on your own play and what you can do to have the team win the entire game. But at some point, it becomes incredibly apparent that you must change your play style suboptimally in order to increase your chances of winning. Now, this is similar to solo queue, that you have to play differently in lower elo in order to win the game. And then there's also pro play as well too, to where certain players will have to play differently because they know that the rest of the team can't really carry or get advantages in other lanes. So certain players then tend to play more risky and then are therefore more readable against the enemy team. So going to the solo queue aspect, you have to play more risky, and you also have the possibility of getting punished, but usually you will go unpunished because you're playing in lower elo. And then oftentimes people resort to split pushing and winning the game through macro instead of a 5v5 team fight through mid lane. And specifically towards the ADCs, because I'm an ADC main, there are different trade patterns that you have to take into account when you're playing in lower elo, such as an ADC knowing his support won't help him with trades. He sits there in the bush. We've all had that support, right? Where he just sits there in the bush and you basically have to 2v1 the lane. And so at that moment, you need to know exactly when to do a trade pattern against the enemy ADC or the enemy support if they go up too far alone to where the enemy ADC can't trade with him, right? And then there's the CSing under tower as an ADC. Maybe you notice that the enemy support, whenever you push into the tower, he doesn't help him CS the caster minions, or even the melee minions in the beginning levels, right? So instead of slow pushing or denying, trying to deny CS through the actual laning phase in the middle, instead you just decide to fast push and you get a incredible CS advantage that way because they can't CS under tower, right? And then there's also the aspect of disregarding your top laner's TP to take advantage of plays across the map, right? Because he's using his TP specifically to go back to lane phase so that he can get his advantage, he can get his CS, because he's only worried about his lane, and his whole idea is not expanding towards the rest of the map, right? He just has this small focus, and he's simply one track minded. Now, translating that into pro play, Lyra is a very prime example of being on a team way below his skill level, simply put, right? Because he literally had to snowball the game himself in order to even have a chance of winning the game. Because the big problem is it would get to team macro and rotations, and his team would just falter, just fall flat on their faces completely. Seraph looked awful in the top lane, Ninja looked incredibly bad in the mid lane, and then bot lane, it just looked lost whenever they didn't get a lead. And so it's incredible to see how Lyra shone on a team that was ridiculously bad and that just couldn't gel together and basically couldn't even get the fundamentals of the game down, and didn't know what to do after they got a lead, which is expanding vision control and going for objectives and knowing how to manipulate the waves in order to do those objectives. And so he was kind of stuck in this pseudo elo hell. Well, I don't want to say elo hell because for this specific video, I know that it can be interpreted as me talking about elo hell, but it's not, because there are two different things between those, which is that Playing under your level means that you have to think of a way to play suboptimally, but also accomplish a victory in that sense, and knowing how to play around your team's weaknesses, right? And so some of these players do have to play suboptimally in order to even have the team gel together, and Lyra is one of those players because he had to play so aggressive in order to get his team a lead at all and to try and get wins on the board. And then there's Froggen. Froggen has been one of the big leaders of mid lane stats last season. Now, some people mention that his faults of why his team didn't win is because he couldn't translate his victories, which, once again, going back to that, I think is complete bullshit, because there comes to a point in professional play where you can only do so much to where it comes into the team phase to where you have to rely on your teams, and there are certain things that you need your teammates to do and to be able to function in order to win the game at all, no matter how far ahead you are or how fed you are. And so in 2016, Keith and Big were just straight up inting in the bot lane, and KFO looked terrible in the top lane as well too. And then in 2017, the bot lane didn't really look much better, and Looper became a liability in the top lane, along with Acadian slumping towards the end of the split, so his entire team was just crumbling around him. And this team had fundamental problems with escaping the lane phase unscathed, along with just a bad understanding of how to play and set up around Baron properly. And this was largely due to lack of vision setup and wave management, specifically mid wave management, in order to set up the Baron plays. And so if you look at Froggen and, like his past team with Alliance, he was fantastic during that time, probably top 5 mid laners in the world. But I think that's particularly because his lineup was considered a super team, and so he could expect his allies to mechanically play correctly and optimally, and so they could constantly go for optimal plays. And one criticism that people have made towards Froggen was his champion pool, considering that they thought it was weak. But I think in reality it's completely different, and I think he tailor-made his champion pool specifically to Echo Fox in order to try and cover up their weaknesses, because you could see he was playing a lot of control mages and a lot of wave clear mids, and that was specifically to stall out the game so that he could scale and possibly win the game. Because, as I said before, the game state goes into something even to where you snowball in the beginning of the game in professional play. It comes to a point where you need to rely on your team in order to get into the late game and then to finally get the victory, right? Well, his chances, he figured, would scale accordingly if he played a scaling champion, and then he could try and win on his own if his team just kind of protected him, right? And so Froggen was well playing under his level, considering his teammates and the surrounding options that he had available on the team itself. And hopping back to the solo queue aspect, one of the greatest players of all time in solo queue has been Apto, right? He's one of the biggest examples of playing according to your team's strengths and knowing your team's weaknesses as well too. He will often carry his leads to other lanes in order to get them rolling so that they can help him close out the game faster. And he's always aware of which waves need to be pushed and what the side lanes are currently doing at all times. And his signature champion, Twisted Fate, is fantastic for manipulating the entire game state. And in that, he can bail out his teammates from ridiculously stupid situations. So he's kind of perfected the whole aspect of playing with teammates under his level, because, I mean, let's be honest, there aren't many people at Apto's level at all. So he has to think in a entirely different mindset when it comes to that and when he's playing solo queue. And then you go to the adverse of Faker. Right? Faker, he's currently struggling and suffering from playing with teammates that are just kind of dragging him under and are completely under his level at the moment. Now, top just looks like shit with Thal and Utara. And then you have the bot lane, they aren't picking up any of the slack either. And that's not to say that Wolf and Bang are particularly bad. It's that they've always been known, or specifically Bang has been known to be incredible during team fights. He is probably one of the best ADCs when it comes to team fights and positioning. But they never get a lead within lane. You can pretty much always count on the bot lane either going even or slightly under when it comes to facing the enemy. And so you have a lane basically that's trying to neutralize the enemy bot lane, and yet all these other lanes are crumbling around them, and suddenly there is no late game for Bang to function at all. And then Blank does some completely idiotic invades occasionally, as well as he just doesn't seem to be on the same page as the rest of his team, probably due to a lack of communication, right? So the only option that SKT has is for Faker to just go ham, right? And which he did on Kassadin against BBQ. But other than that, just this entire season, that's all that they're banking on, right? And so when you play under your level, you have to get into this different mind state. And it's no longer about what is the most optimal play to do. It's what can your entire team pull off. And you may have to play more risky like Faker is currently doing, because you know the rest of your team isn't going to gain a lead for you during the game. And this type of mentality is basically just a downward spiral, just straight into the toilet, and that'll create bitterness eventually. And that is why I don't agree with having one superstar among completely shit players. And it also creates a situation of predictability when facing other teams, and that they know exactly who you're going to play through, which SKT is suffering from this problem currently. So I just think playing with teammates under your level should not be done when it comes to superstar players such as Froggen or such as Faker. And when building a roster, yeah, sure, you can't know exactly if this is going to happen or not, so it's very difficult to determine within that time. But it just looks awful when you see a player having to completely change their play style in order to fit within the team suboptimally, so that they can even have a chance to function as a unit.